Online education platforms have helped children continue to learn throughout the pandemic, but could the fallout of school closures follow students for the rest of their lives? I'm Rachel Sherman, a reporter at Coda Story. Here at Coda, we connect the dots between seemingly unrelated stories, and the question I want to ask today is, what effect will the pandemic have on the digital surveillance of kids? In the US, the shutdown of 124,000 public and private institutions has forced 55 million students into remote learning. Globally, school closures have impacted over half of the world's student population, leaving learners more reliant on education apps than ever before. The need for remote learning across the world has created a boom in education software. Programs like ClassDojo, OpenSchool, BrainPop, and Scholastic are not new tools, but they're now being utilized on a different scale. Students and parents in the millions now rely on these apps for an education. Many of these platforms collect a huge amount of personally identifiable information, including the user's location, mobile phone number, and home address. But according to a recent study of EdTech applications, only 1 in 5 clearly state how long this data will be held.
What you really want to see is this data will be kept no longer than 5 years or 2 years or however many years. What you don't want to see is something open-ended. That's very much a red flag. So we looked at 57 platforms that have been recommended by the G20 governments, and we found that over half of them posed a high risk to children's privacy.
Some nations were worse offenders than others. Japan, Russia, Mexico, Indonesia, Saudi Arabia, and South Africa were among the countries whose governments made the riskiest recommendations for online learning apps. These risks are real. In addition to security threats, many children learn on their parents' devices, which means that in-app marketing and ad tracking could be geared towards adults, but accessed by kids.
And what it means is, in practice, is that a child might be exposed to advertising that's intended for adults. It might be gambling, or it might be adult content. Is it right for children to be tracked and advertised at in this way?
The pandemic has surfaced some of the privacy pitfalls of EdTech platforms for learning from home, but it's also introduced a whole new set of risks for students learning from schools. Schools under pressure to reopen are turning to contact tracing apps in the hopes of containing potential outbreaks. Students must use these apps in order to attend class. These technologies track students and record their location data, including the time and duration of interactions between students. Most of these apps continue to track students even when they're not in school. This is especially important to consider for Black and Brown Americans. Extraneous data collection could be used against them and used to further exacerbate existing inequality.
We're likely to see students being disciplined, being suspended, being expelled, or even being handed over to police for, drug use, for graffiti, for truancy, simply because of how they're being tracked with these systems.
Students and parents are subsequently forced to opt into surveillance technologies in order to receive an education because they have no other choice.
We all supposedly agree to it before we use it. But if you have to choose between getting an education and clicking I agree, that's really not consent, not in any meaningful term.
Data collected from these softwares could follow kids for years, potentially creating a case against them for law enforcement, future employers, and universities, essentially placing a digital target on their backs. It also opens a window for advertisers to target minors and collect their data like never before. But it's not just children who will be affected by these stories. The emerging trends in digital surveillance will have an impact on all of our lives.